You can be anyone. I mean, we work with so many different entrepreneurs, business owners, sales, marketing experts, LinkedIn experts, healers, leadership coaches. So basically, it doesn't really matter what you do. As you said, George, there's always a podcast for whatever you do. So you will find your niche. You just have to dig a little bit deep. You have to do your research in order to find it.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And when you listen to this podcast, you will gain insights, communication insights from experts around the world on various aspects about how we communicate in business and how you can do it better. My guest today is Noemi Beres. She is a podcast guesting expert and entrepreneur who rebuilt her business to six figures after losing it during the pandemic. Remember that pandemic? Can't forget that. Two, she's co-founder of the Podcast Connections podcast booking agency and has been featured on numerous podcasts, sharing strategies for successful guesting and authentic connection. There's no other one that counts than authentic. And three, Noemi is a creative mixed media artist who loves drumming, walking by the sea in Cyprus. Yeah, rub it in. We got snow over here. And finding joy in life's simple moments. Noemi, welcome to Your Intended Message.
It's an honor to be on your show, George.
Delighted to be talking with you today, especially reaching out to you in Cyprus. Well, many of us are looking at snow here in North America. However, I'm not complaining because I'm looking forward to skiing this season soon. So I'm actually enjoying the snow coming, and I'm like that little kid. Oh, it's snowing, mommy, daddy, it's snowing. Yep, that was me. Noemi, the Podcast Connections agency helps people get booked on podcasts. And podcasting as a medium for getting your message out to the world has exploded in the past decade. It's amazing. I really didn't see it happen. I'm amazed at how it's growing. And one of the neat things about podcasts is it doesn't matter what your interest is, there's a podcast about it.
True.
You'll find
Absolutely true, yeah.
Somewhere there will be a podcast about it. Why do people want to be on podcasts, and who, the two-part question, who should be a guest on a podcast?
That's a great question, George. Thank you. First of all, why? There's a lot of advantages to be a guest on a podcast. First of all, it builds your brand. Second, it builds your authority. Once you get on the shows, your name will pop up in Google everywhere. You know, people type your name in, and it's just a perfect place for your, for your website SEO. And for you as a business owner, it's a great long-term marketing strategy to build your business, basically. And it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, an author, a podcast host. Even if a podcast host, you can be on other podcast host shows. Yes, I mean, I would say these are the top three advantages, but there are so many more advantages to be a guest on shows. And also, it's a fabulous networking opportunity, and also building authentic connections with the podcast host and also with the audience. And because you don't know who's listening, and because you create evergreen content, the content will stay up in Apple Podcasts or YouTube forever, basically. So people can listen to this podcast in the upcoming years, months, and decades, because the information you share, it's evergreen. So it will be there. You can be anyone. I mean, we work with so many different entrepreneurs, business owners, sales, marketing experts, LinkedIn experts, healers, leadership coaches. So basically, it doesn't really matter what you do. As you said, George, there's always a podcast for whatever you do. So you will find your niche. You just have to dig a little bit deep. You have to do your research in order to find it.
And one of the appealing features of podcasts is that people typically listen to the podcast while they're doing something else. They might be traveling, they might be driving, they might be walking on the beach in Cyprus, listening to. But they're usually doing something. They might be even at home. They might be cooking in the kitchen, or
Right.
doing cleaning up the house, or maybe they're doing something in their backyard, in the garden. But they're usually doing something else, which means that people don't need to dedicate a whole lot of specific time, and it's not like reading a book. I happen to enjoy reading a book. However, I have to schedule time to do it, and I shut everything else out while I'm reading the book. And a lot of people don't read that much anymore. It takes time, takes effort. Whereas listening to a podcast, we can be in a comfort zone. We're typically not stressed. We're not going to listen to it when we're doing something stressful. So the information and the connection we build with the guest and the host is friendlier, probably more memorable. When people come to you and say, "Get me on a podcast," and what questions do you have to them? First of all, to see if you want to work with them, and two, where to target for them.
Yes, that's another great question. First of all, we have to figure out if we are vibing, if we are in this, we are in the same space, and we have to feel that. My business coach told me once that if you can sit down with someone, have a coffee, a tea, or you can lunch together, then that's the right customer for you. If you can do that with them, because there's something just not right, and your gut feeling telling you is something off. So don't go for it. And how to figure out which niche they need to cover. We have those deep conversations with the clients, obviously, because we represent them and we have to do the research for them. So it's always important for us to know who's your ideal client is. Because obviously we need to find the podcast that is right for them. It's right for their business. And although I have to emphasize, because podcasts are not only for promotion, and you don't have to treat them as an advertisement, but it's also part of a marketing strategy. So we have to figure out first and foremost who the ideal client is for a particular guest. Because once we know that, we know who their tribe is and where are they hanging out, which podcast are they on, what kind of podcast they're listening to. So I think that's most of the time it's a very important question. And it's very interesting because many people don't know the answer to that. So who's your ideal client is, and they really have to think about is, who's my ideal client? That's very interesting. I found that very interesting during conversations.
And have you ever turn someone away and say, "No, I'm not going to work with you. I can't work with you. We're not a good fit"?
Yes. Yeah. I think we have to learn to say no. And you just feel it, as I explained, your gut feeling just telling you that this is not the right person for you. And we are just not right to each other. Maybe there's another podcast booking agency they can serve them. But yeah, we just didn't vibe. We just didn't feel the right connection. So yeah, I think we all need to say no sometimes. It's better on the long term for sure. Because I had cases when I said yes, and it wasn't the best decision. So I learned from my mistakes.
And yeah, I mean, most of us need to learn better from our mistakes. And I've made those mistakes too, where I've said yes and I should have said no. So I have been more aware. I have learned from some of my mistakes anyways, not all of them. And I'll point out to our listeners that Noemi reached out to me, and we had a conversation long before she started referring guests to me. So we needed to have a relationship first. And she continues to be supportive of my podcast when I publish it, mainly on LinkedIn these days. So the point there is that you first have a relationship with the host before you can introduce the host to a prospect guest. And I've received email messages from people who want to book guests, and they don't make a connection with me at all. And then they wonder why I say no. You haven't done, and people, and here's a mistake that a lot of people seem to make, potential guests even, they think it's all about them. What do you say to that? What advice do you give to your guests to help them get past that blind spot?
Yes, we have those strategy calls, or we can call a coaching session. And we always tell our clients that this is not about you. This is about the podcast host. I mean, basically, you are honored to be a guest on the show, because the show is, obviously, they need guests, but it's not for just you. It doesn't exist because of you. It will run anyway. So if you're a guest or not. So I think it's just really important to understand that we have to be respectful with the hosts, because I mean, come on. I mean, you do an awful lot of job and you work a lot. You spend so much money, energy, time on creating these episodes. And what I notice, sometimes people just take it granted that they can be guests on the show and they can be the conductors of the show, even they are the guests. And I got that feedback from a couple of, hosts when I had a few clients on the show, and they said, it's like, I'm the host and they can't really dictate what I'm doing here because I'm the boss. Like, don't take it the wrong way. It's just, but you have to understand the roles, because you are a guest. And yes, you can promote your product. Yes, you can promote your book or service, but still you are a guest. So you have to appreciate that and, honored to be on the show. So that's how I try to prepare my clients, George.
And that's valuable advice. And another point that you mentioned earlier that I'm going to pick up on is that once the podcast is published, it's out there pretty much forever. And for that reason, you might want to pay attention to what you say on a podcast, because you don't want the wrong message coming back to haunt you years later.
Very true. You create evergreen content, and you just can't delete that anymore. Obviously, you can ask the host to delete your episode if you're not happy with it, or even the host can delete your episode if they are not happy with it, or even not even publish it. But yes, you have to be really conscious about what kind of podcast you're getting on. And because if you end up on the wrong podcast, it might give it's a different message to your potential clients or people who listen to. So be careful what kind of podcast you're looking for, because you can be on anything, but I think quality is better than quantity. So be aware of, there are certain podcasts out there that maybe not the right for you. Yeah.
And I'm glad you say that quality is better than quantity, because again, I hear from people who think that it's all about quantity. Do you know how many podcasts I've been on this year? I've been on 200. So yours is nothing different and nothing I don't know. Really? I'm really valuable to you, aren't I?
Yes, I know.
What do you suggest that guests do to leverage their appearance? Once they've appeared and it's been published, how might they leverage it?
The best way to do that, George, first of all, to say just a plain thank you to the host. You can even send a handwritten thank you note. That's beautiful. But we don't all have time for that, and we might live in different continents like me. So it's hard for me to do that. But you can always send an email thank you note, and they'd be happy to, accept that and acknowledge that, because I know for sure from podcast hosts that not many people do that. So once you do that, you stand out of the crowd. And I think that's important. You can also ask the podcast host to jump on a post-interview call when they ever have time, just like 15, 20 minutes, just to get on and try to figure out whether you have any collaboration opportunities or any potential business opportunities between you two. Because I always tell George to people that once you have an interview, that's just the start of your relationship. It really depends on you. How do you use it to your advantage? And you give something and the host gives you back something. And it's a mutual great relationship. And it's about, giving to other people and serving other people. And it's just a beautiful opportunity. And also repurposing the content. I just repurpose. It's not enough to publish something just once on LinkedIn or on Facebook or Instagram. Please use it You can even do monthly, and you can go back to your old podcast appearances because people won't remember what you posted 2-3 weeks ago or a month ago on LinkedIn. So you can always go back. You can always cut up the interview. You can ask for the raw file from the host. You can cut it up. You can make audio clips, video clips, quotes, anything. The opportunities are endless. You can just use it wisely. And then you have a lot of content for many months to come, because content is still king when it comes to podcast guesting and for social media as well.
Now, you talked about the value of promoting your brand. Are you talking about the brand as an individual or brand as a business?
It really depends what you're doing in your business, because you can be an author and then that you yourself, you're the brand, or you can be an artist, or that's your brand, your name, or a photographer. But obviously you can have a brand, a company that you are representing. And we do that too. We do both. And it's a perfect opportunity for both, basically.
And I'm thinking about people who are in their career path. And they still have runway left in their career, and they want to be seen to be a potential, perhaps the next job, the next opportunity. Are there people who leverage podcasts for that kind of credibility?
Yes, I mean, like, there's a podcast for everything. So even if you're employed and you work for a company, I work, for example, with a podcast host that basically he's part of the company, also an employee of the company, and he's an incredible, guest. And yes, you can use it to build the brand and the authority for the company you're working for. That's an absolutely option. Sometimes even 2-3 people from the same company get on podcasts, and we represent them, and we just switch them up, and they can cover different topics on different podcasts. So there's also option to do that. Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I'm thinking about what a great way to get to know someone. First, the host and the guest, because we have a conversation, and that might run anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the podcast. Yeah. But in that conversation, we have a chance to explore some ideas, see what we have in common, maybe discover some different points of view, but we get a better idea of each other. And you're right, now we have a relationship, and this is a much stronger relationship than running around a networking event saying, here's my card, call me. Need insurance, call me, here's my card, which I've experienced recently, and it's not a comforting atmosphere when they do that. But here we get to talk. And I guess for the listeners, they get a chance of hearing both of us in conversation while they're kind of outside and safe, and they get a better idea about what we're both like in terms of our opinion, temperament, expertise. And they get to decide, oh, I like that person, or I disagree with that. I would never have lunch with that person. But here's a safe way to listen in to almost like private conversations that are made public.
Yes, it's just amazing that. Yeah, it's so different when you are a keynote speaker, because that's like some kind of a monologue that you do there, and you talk to people, and that's it. I mean, you have an audience, and you have to tell your story, share your crafted story, share your crafted message. But that's you're standing on a stage. But then when you are on the other side of the mic and you are a guest, it's a completely different experience. It's like, as you said, George, you're having a friendly conversation with someone about a certain topic that you agreed on, and it's just two friends talking to each other, and it's recorded, and probably a couple of hundreds or thousands of people will listen to it too. So it's kind of the openness and the vulnerability about that conversation is really, really important, because I had a keynote speaker client before, and she was a bit upset about it, that like she can't really feel the same way as she's on stage. And she was kind of freaking out when she got on the show for the first time. She got so much better at it. But first she was really, really nervous. And how am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do there? It's very nerve-wracking because I'm not the same. I'm not the same person. So it's really interesting to see like amazing, very talented keynote speakers having trouble with podcast guesting, because yes, we are sitting in our room, in our home office, our family is here somewhere in the house probably, and it's such a different experience. It's more a private and more intimate experience, I guess, when you are.
And I certainly have experienced that perspective. Yeah, it's one skill set to be able to stand at the front of the room or on stage and deliver a presentation. And when you are the speaker, you have control of the room and you are doing the talking. And you think, oh, okay, and I say this, then I say that, then I say that, then I get them to do this, then I say this. But now you're in a podcast and you don't know what's going to happen or what the questions are going to be. And that's a different skill set, and it takes takes practice to get used to it, no question. And I have experienced keynote speakers who come on the interview and give a keynote.
Yes. Yeah. This is not the place and time for that.
No. Oh, hey, did I need to show up? You could have just given your keynote. What do you find that guests, other than that, those keynote speakers who are afraid of what other concerns, challenges do they have?
They are having difficulties, George, to craft their story and condense their story, because they can talk about it for hours. We can all tell our stories and share our stories for hours and hours. But a podcast interview maximum is, as we talked about, like 30 minutes to 1 hour. So you really have to be conscious about the timing of your story. So yes, first of all, you need to craft the story, and then you need to practice to share that story. Maybe you do that with your partner, your husband, your kid, with your friend, with someone. You try to condense your story in like a shorter version, because you won't have time for that. And that's what I found the problem with some, not problem, but it's a challenge for some people, because they can talk a lot, but to giving valuable, like just to give a valuable lesson to the listeners, to the audience, you need to craft it, and you need to make it shorter and to make other people understand it in an easy way.
Valuable advice. There's no question we love to listen to stories. However, we have a short attention span. Like, get to the end already. What happened next? Like, let's get there. We don't need all these details. And that's a problem if you are trying to wing it, as opposed to saying, well, okay, I've got these 2 or 3 stories. How can I better rehearse them before I get on? Imagine that, rehearsing your stories before you get on. People might think that, oh, I just show up for a podcast and just go with the flow. They probably don't think about preparing so much. Do you give them some advice other than, make your story shorter? What other advice or tips do you give them so that they can prepare, be better prepared?
First of all, George, they need to listen to the episode, at least 1 or 2. Like I come today on the show and I listen to an episode, and because it's so important. And I learned so much from it, the way you interview people, what kind of questions you ask, how do you ask them. So yes, please listen to at least 1 episode, or not 2, if you have time. I think that's really, really important. And also be engaging. Speak clearly and with enthusiasm. Don't be too slow, don't be too fast, but try to find that sweet spot between the two. And that's and try to not to be too formal or stiff. Just be yourself. I know it's a cliche to be yourself, but yes, try to be yourself a little bit more, because once you are more yourself, people align with your message so much easier. They can, oh, she's a friendly person, or he's a friendly person, and I can talk to her on, LinkedIn. It's really, the first impression is really important. And you have about like 30 minutes here during the conversation to have that, first impression. And if it's not so much, don't giving those vibes, you don't give that vibe that, I mean, that can makes a, huge difference. And also, for me, it was always important for the clients to be punctual, to be respectful, to get ready, to have a proper background, a mic, lighting. The sound is very important, obviously, because you are in a podcast. So just getting ready and being the right mindset when you are on the show, and not just running from one meeting to another. And it's like, oh, let's just get over it. Because once I can feel that. And even was on podcast when I felt that from the podcast host, that was the vibe. Oh, come on. Next question. And I felt so intimidated by it that I didn't feel well at all. And I think just, do a little bit of meditation, breathing exercise or something before you get in a podcast, even just for 5 minutes, just to get in the state and the flow of that conversation, because you have to be present. Otherwise people can notice that, they will feel it, that you are not present. They're just thinking about something else, or your next 2 Zoom calls or next interview. So be present, be open, be vulnerable.
A lot of valuable wisdom in there, Noemi. I encourage people to listen to this podcast again to pick up the fine points about how to be better prepared and not scheduling your interviews back to back.
No, please don't.
No, because you need that time. You need that time to prepare. You need that time to rest from the previous one. You need to get your mind around this next guest. And one of the points, too, you mentioned about being authentic, be your real self. And I believe people need to be okay with stumbling or making a mistake. Yeah. As long as they don't stumble all the way through, but the odd little stumble, a word that doesn't come out right, a thought that's incomplete, and they say, no, that's not, where am I going with that? No, let me fix that up. That's okay. That's normal conversation. And we'll accept that. We don't expect you to be perfectly spoken. In fact, I believe if you appear too perfect, we don't like you. We don't trust you. How can that person be real? They're too perfect. And on that line, your first language is Hungarian.
Correct.
And you studied Swedish or Scandinavian?
Danish first. I'm a linguist by trade. Yeah, Danish, then Swedish. Yes.
And then I understand you even tried learning Irish, and that didn't work at all.
I'm doing it, George. I'm Greek as well. I'm
and now the reason I point it out, because English is the most popular language, and yet there are experts who are coming where English is not their first language, and they might feel intimidated. Yeah. What advice do you have for people who English isn't their first language and they have an obvious accent? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, it's when people I know, because I was that person too. I struggled with that English is not my first language. And what will people say? I will make grammatical mistakes. That's for sure, because this is not my first language. But then I make mistakes because I speak many languages. If I wouldn't make mistakes if I wouldn't speak English. So that's one thing. And you need just practice, rinse and repeat, and get on this podcast. And yes, we all make mistakes. Even native English speakers, they make a lot of mistakes. So come on. I mean, you can do this and just practice it. 1 interview, 2 interviews, 3 interviews, and you're just getting so much better if you rinse and repeat the whole podcast guesting experience. And just trust yourself, because you're worth it. You're an expert in something, and it doesn't matter if you're a native speaker, you're not a native speaker, you still have that amazing amount of knowledge about something that you want to share with the world. And that's the most important thing. And it's about self-esteem. It's about confidence. You just have to practice it. And please don't aim, the big shows first. I mean, let's get on the smaller ones. Let's get on the mid-sized ones and practice with them. Maybe they have, 50 subscribers on YouTube, and that's okay. But there's a space to practice those. And I think that's a great opportunity to do so.
And good advice. And another reminder too is that not all podcast guests have the same style
Right.
or the same expertise or same perspective. And that's why you need to listen first to see what their style and what their approach is and be ready for that, so that you're not thrown when they ask that question that they ask everybody, or they do whatever they do in their style. So be aware of them, because they are different, and some of them have different rules, which is one of the reasons why I feel it's important that we have that initial chat before the interview to get acquainted with each other and say, okay, here's the guidelines of what we're doing. And that's beneficial for you. I know there have been some guests, a few guests, who didn't want to do that. And they didn't become a guest on my show, because I feel that's an important step. When you're talking to a potential guest and they're coming to you for the first time, what would be, and you tell them, and you need to tell them, you need to do some homework. I want you to go away and do these 2-3 things. What might be that homework you would give them?
The first and most important homework, George, is to ask them to think about their topics and talking points they want to share on podcast. Because, please don't wing it. And I know there are very famous podcast guests and everything, and they never wing it. They always prepare for whatever show they get on. And for that scenario, you just have to be clear, super clear about your topics and talking points. What do you want to focus on during the conversation? You can, and that's crucial for us, because once we pitch someone to a podcast, we need those topics, we need those talking points. Sometimes they don't know what to do, and we help that. We help with that, so that's okay. And if they just have a few ideas, but they have to be clear about it for sure. So that's one of the things that they need to, and also the story. If they, just going back to that, if they don't have a story, they have to think about what kind of story they need to share on podcasts. I had a funny case with one of the ex-clients we used to have, and he said, it's like, I don't want to talk about the same thing all the time on podcasts. And I told him, it's like, well, I mean, you can't really switch around all the time, like whatever you're talking about, because this is about you, this is about your business, and you can't change and switch it up all the time. Obviously, you can make changes, but it can be like a mix and match of whatever it comes to your mind on a podcast. I mean, we usually talk about the same topics and same talking points. Maybe we use different wording, we use different sentences, but the meaning is still the same. So you have to be clear about your topics, talking points.
And valuable point. And I've seen this with speakers too. Speakers who deliver a presentation who get tired of their presentation before the audience does, because I've done this 50 times already. I want to change the message. Well, if it's working, and it's the same thing is true for marketers who are putting out a message, whether it's online or other media, if the message is working, then don't worry that you are getting bored of it. And you can't show that you're getting bored because the message is important to you. Noemi, for those that are interested to learn more about you, your services, they can find you at the website that is podcastconnections.co.
Yes, correct.
And you can find that link in the description below. As we prepare to wrap up, final 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice that you have to business leaders to promote their brand, whether it's their company or their career, and they see podcasts as an avenue. What would be the plan that you would suggest they put together for, say, the new year? How could they? Because it's not just a 1 month and done kind of thing. It's over time. So how could they sustain podcasting being a podcast guest over a year's time? What kind of plan would you suggest to come up with?
It's a very simple plan, George. It's just be consistent and be persistent, whatever you do. You just have to rinse and repeat it. And please don't accept just like it's going to be an overnight success, because it won't be. Some people, they just want, okay, I get on 2 podcasts and 4 podcasts and we'll see what happens. What happened. And it's like, nothing probably, or you may get lucky or you just establish a great connection with the podcast host and maybe you start a business venture together. But that's the 20%. The 80% of the time, nothing major will happen, because podcast guesting is a long-term marketing strategy. You have to put that effort and energy into, do it every month. At least I would suggest 2 interviews monthly. So that's doable, like financially, energy wise. So people can totally do that. And just please be consistent and be persistent, and you will see the results. I've seen the results in my business when I'm doing guesting, and I've seen the result in my clients' business as well. So it works. And sometimes they just ask me about the download numbers and everything. It's not really important. What is important is that you are in your niche. And once you are in the niche, maybe just 10 people listen to that podcast, but they can be all of them your potential clients. While you can be on Joe Rogan or on Amy Porterfield, but those people who listen to those podcasts, they are most interested in the podcast host and not in you. So yeah, this is the advice and the plan. It's very simple. Just keep doing it, please.
Valuable advice. My guest today is Noemi Beres, reminding you that become a guest to promote your brand, and remember, be authentic. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.